The Strait of Hormuz may look like a narrow line on the map, but in the global economy, it is far more than a line. It is a nerve. It is an artery. Every crisis that erupts in this narrow passage affects not only the Middle East, but also oil, gas, maritime trade, central banks, and ultimately the daily lives of ordinary people. Today, this is no longer just about war. It is about the security of energy flows, the fragility of trade routes, and whether the global system is really as stable as it appears. The real question is this: after the Strait of Hormuz crisis, what does the United States lose? What does Europe lose? What does Asia lose? And in the end, what do ordinary citizens lose? The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most critical choke points in the global energy system. A major share of the world's oil and LNG passes through this route every day. That means any disruption here is not a regional issue. It is a global industrial, logistical, and pricing issue. When energy flows through such a narrow corridor, even a small disruption can trigger a chain reaction across continents. This is why energy shocks do not begin on supermarket shelves or in inflation reports. They begin on the map. Then they move to ports, insurance contracts, delivery schedules, refinery planning, and freight pricing. By the time the average consumer notices the impact, the crisis has already passed through multiple layers of the global system. When a tanker cannot move freely, the problem is not limited to one shipment. Delivery times expand, insurance premiums rise, alternative routes become more expensive. Port coordination is disrupted. Refinery input schedules become unstable. LNG cargoes can be redirected. And when that happens, countries are no longer competing only on price. They begin competing for physical access, timing, and supply security. This is where the United States enters the story. America may appear less vulnerable in physical energy terms than Europe or Asia, largely because it is one of the world's largest energy producers. But that does not mean it is protected from the consequences of a price shock. The real risk for the United States is inflation expectations. If oil prices remain elevated, gasoline becomes more expensive, transportation costs rise, businesses face higher input costs, and households grow more cautious. In that environment, central banks become more hesitant. Rate cuts may be delayed. Borrowing stays expensive. Credit remains tight. So America's loss is not primarily a shortage of energy, but the return of inflation pressure, higher financing costs, and greater stress on consumers. Europe faces a more fragile picture. Energy costs there hit both industry and household budgets more directly. Growth is already weaker, and when energy prices rise again, the continent faces a painful combination: higher inflation and slower economic activity at the same time. That is an especially difficult balance for European policymakers. It means factories operate under greater pressure, transport becomes more expensive, imported energy becomes harder to secure, and households feel the burden in heating, electricity, food, and daily expenses. Europe is also vulnerable because it does not simply face high energy prices. It faces competition for access. If LNG cargoes that might have supported European demand are pulled elsewhere, then the problem is no longer just cost. It becomes a question of timing, availability, and resilience. In that kind of environment, energy policy becomes economic policy, and economic policy becomes a matter of stability. Asia faces the most immediate exposure. Many Asian economies are deeply dependent on Gulf energy flows. When oil and LNG routes are disrupted, the consequences move quickly into industrial production, export competitiveness, and consumer prices. This is not just about expensive fuel. It is about the continuity of manufacturing, the rhythm of trade, and the ability of entire economies to function smoothly. For Asia, an energy disruption is not only a market event, it is a structural vulnerability becoming visible in real time. Every delay, every rerouting decision, every spike in freight or fuel costs can echo through factories, ports, and retail prices. In highly interconnected production economies, even a short disruption can create a far wider economic ripple than many people expect. But in the end, the most important question is not what governments lose. It is what ordinary people lose, and that process is simpler than it first appears. If oil rises, transport becomes more expensive. If transport becomes more expensive, the cost of getting goods to market rises. If energy becomes more expensive, production becomes more expensive. Logistics become more expensive. Public transportation becomes more expensive. Delivery costs rise. Food prices rise. Rent pressure builds. Household budgets tighten. That is why energy prices function like an invisible